Hello, and welcome to this edition of Secure Networks, the Endace Packet Forensic Files, with your host, Michael Morris. This episode's very special guest is Matt Bromiley, SANS instructor and veteran threat hunting expert. Matt, thank you for joining. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hey, Michael, it's great to be here. Great to see you again. And as always, it's awesome to be chatting with you. My name is Matt Bromley. I appreciate that introduction. Veteran threat hunting expert. I got to tell you, those adjectives being put together in that way feel really good. I hope I can live up to the name. But that said, everyone, it's great to meet you. Great to see you. If you never heard me before. My name is Matt. I have been in incident response and cybersecurity for way many more years, decade plus, than I like to mention. Now, I did a lot of time as an incident responder, kind of getting those phone calls and responding to those incidents, if you will, but dealing with various threat actors, different types of adversaries and things like that. Over the kind of latter years of my career leading up to now, I am happy to have provided managed detection and response capabilities and then get into kind of product building and helping solve like security infrastructure issues. And the entire time, I've also been a SANS instructor teaching advanced host forensics and advanced network forensics. And I also do a lot of work with our SANS analyst program as well, which is where I think we first met, Michael.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've been excited to wanting to interview you because obviously we talk on this podcast a lot about incident response, investigations, really trying to evangelize and educate our listeners on that. So I'm real keen to share your expertise with our listeners. And so let's kind of start off with best practices. What are some of the best practices you've come across in threat hunting that organizations should be adopting to enhance their cybersecurity posture?
Yeah, this is always a really important starting point, I think, for anyone who's like, I want to threat hunt. The first best practice I always put into place is make sure your detection and response capabilities are ready to go. As odd as that sounds, threat hunting is often viewed as a very proactive style of security where we have the right telemetry, we have the right things, the knowledge of what we're looking for, we're going to go find these things. And I've always found it to be an interesting juxtaposition of like, okay, you found it, now what? And it's like, what do we do now? And it's like, okay, so make sure your response processes are in place first, number one. Number two, make sure the reactive side of things is functional and working. So if you've got a security operations team, make sure that there's someone who's manning the ticket queue and watching for things that are happening inside of the environment. Because a lot of times threat hunting starts out as a effort or a goal that the security team has, and it's in addition to everything else that's happening. So I like to have that posturing in place, which is if you find a thing, how do we respond to that thing, and are we ready for that? When it comes to actual threat hunting, meaning, okay, now we're going to get into this. From a best practice perspective, the first thing I always call out is make sure the thing that you're hunting for, you can actually see. I had this discussion with a few students over the class that I taught, and full disclosure, we're a little bit after Black Hat this year. But in a class that I taught at Black Hat, one of the things that I worked with students about there was understand what it is you're looking for and make sure that the data that you have actually supports the hypotheses that you're building, that you're looking for. This might sound kind of like a no-brainer to some folks, but I tend to invoke really a lot of like modern enterprise setups these days. So if you think about like hybrid clouds, telemetry and disparate data sets, different authentication login mechanisms, if your threat hunt is I'm going to look for evidence, or I'm going to hunt for account abuse, well, first off, that's a massive hypothesis, number one. Number two, where do you start? Right? Do we start with I'm going to go look at my SSO logins? Are we going to go look at email? We're going to go look at like some sort of centralized identity provider, whatever it might be. Make sure you've got the data to support it. And my last little best practice here about enhancing, or kind of a best practice for threat hunting to use it to enhance, is going to be make sure that, and I might have a controversial opinion here, Michael, there's no such thing as a failed threat hunt, in my opinion. And I'm going to throw this out here. The first thing is, if you take the endeavor to go on a hunt, you've already won. All right. You've already won, which is my team now has enough awareness that we're going to go do this thing. So that's already a win, because there are a lot of security teams that want to get out of a reactive state. Getting into a proactive state is a great win to have. One. Two, you might find out that you don't have the telemetry that you thought you did, or it's not turned up to where you want it to be. all great stuff because now I know what to do next, right?
Right.
3, good threat hunts, ones that either have findings or don't, lead to good detections as well. We're going to go hunt for a thing. Do we have the telemetry? Yes. Is the hypothesis sound? Yes. Did we explore all the data? Yes. Did we find anything? No. Do I want to be this manual ever again? No. Write a detection and put it into place. And I think one of the best practices should be there's no such thing as a failed hunt. My team is always going to find a way to have a win in every hunt that we do.
Right.
And that's going to, there's a lot of takeaways there. It's going to keep morale up and keep the hunters hunting and stuff. But more importantly, it's going to say, we understand that what we're doing here is a learning effort and it's not a 1 or a 0 necessarily.
No, that's a great point. And I've heard some use cases actually from our customers proving the negative is a win as well, right? Which is a non-failed threat hunt, right? Proving that you didn't have some of the issue that you thought you might have had or could have had, right? Depending on what you're looking for. So
yeah, absolutely.
A good clarifying point that we should probably bring up. How does proactive threat hunting really differ from traditional reactive cybersecurity measures and incident response, and why is it important?
Yeah, a lot of times, a lot of security approaches, incident response playbooks, SOC operations, whatever it might be, or SecOps, if you will, is based around an alert has been fired from a thing. Let's go respond to that alert. And that alert may be driven by, a third party. It may be driven by the tools you have in place and their intelligence or their baked in logic or baked in rules or whatever detection capabilities. But I think the understanding there, Michael, is like my team does not have the ability to wrap their head around every single thing an adversary could do. So we're going to rely on some sort of detection and alerting mechanism to tell us when that thing has happened. That is the reactive side. And it's a cornerstone. It's a foundation for any security operations center because you can't get your head around everything that's out there, right? Proactive then takes the stance of, I am aware that there might be some things going on in my network that we either don't have detections in place for or are very niche to what my company or what my organization does, that I can't sit back and lean on detection technology to say, this is 100% covered or this has never happened. Right. I look at it like I can break it down really easily into like kind of network traffic, if you will. I view a threat hunt as like, is RDP traffic bad? And it's like, what for some organizations, it's a policy no. For other organizations, the answer is it depends. Right. In that it depends, there's a threat hunt to be found, which is where is it allowed and where is it not? And then let's go and explore further. But taking that proactive stance breaks you out of and breaks your team out of just waiting for something to happen or waiting for something to fire and says, I'm going to harness the fact that I know my network is individual and unique. And I'm going to start to look for things that other people might not have inside their environment. I view it as a little bit of a maturity stake for a security team as well.
No, that's a great point. And I mean, you and I both know that so much malware today is multi-layered in terms of different steps in activity, reconnaissance, lateral movement, command and control, all sorts of different stages of an attack that you've got to find out beyond that initial indicator. Is there other stuff going on, right? That's to your point. So you mentioned network detection and response in one of your earlier comments. You got to have that as a foundation. So can you drill into a little more about how the role of network packet data is important in cybersecurity investigations? Obviously, we're a fan of you because you teach so much around investigating inner packets, and obviously that's our specialty. But how is it really crucial compared to other types of data?
Yeah. First off, anyone who's heard me say this before, I apologize for the repetition. The network is the least common denominator for 99% of attacks that are out there. I'll kind of die on that hill of I'm a firm believer that I'm putting aside things like encryption and unknown or different protocols and stuff. I'm just making a statement that the minimum kind of layer that gets hit by every single type of attack is the network one. So that right there, Michael, I think throws it into an important stage, which is any investigation, any threat hunt, anything can be amplified by network data always. Right? Like you may be looking at the host-based evidence. You can say, oh, okay, I see this user logged in from here. They logged in at this time. They logged out at that time. It's the network data that's going to say, and there was 100 megabyte of file transfer during that time. Right. So things like that are important for the context of what may have happened. And just think about how that statement works, right? Imagine you're talking to a board, a C-suite, legal, and you're like, oh yeah, the user logged in at 1 p.m. and logged out at 1:30 p.m. Okay, what did they do for 30 minutes? I don't know, because all the forensic evidence was removed, right? Flip that to, they were in there for 30 minutes. What did they do? I don't know. The on-disk evidence has been wiped. However, in the network traffic, we saw 300 megs go outbound. How much more impactful is that statement than the other way around? So I view it as very critical, especially in an incident response perspective, if you have it, because it just paints a portion of the picture, or helps fill in the puzzle, if you want, that you can't get anywhere else. Or, and let me just be clear, in other cases, you can get that level of data from a host-based system, but you're looking at a representation of network data. And I guess where I'll go with that is like, oh, well, we might not have network data, but we have DNS logs. And I'm like, okay, network protocol, but you're on a host that served as a DNS server. So I see how it kind of can translate into, this feels like host-based evidence because it's logs from a host, but it's logs of network protocol. And DNS ends up becoming a really key pivotal part of investigations as well. So I find it always ropes back to, the network is going to often be a very important piece of the puzzle. It can amplify the findings. It can amplify what's there, but it's also one that you can't get that type of context anywhere else.
Right.
Now, if we go a step further, if there is decrypted traffic or unencrypted or decrypted traffic, how much more powerful is that? I can see the web page. I can see the malware. I can see everything that happened. I mean, that's the adversary can do whatever they want on the system that they infected. If it's in the PCAPs, guess what? We're there. There's that old saying, PCAPs or didn't happen. That should tell you. Someone told me this at Black Hat. Might have been you, Michael. I can't remember.
I was going to say, we were talking about that shirt at Black Hat.
Yeah. I've never seen a T-shirt that says Windows event logs or it didn't happen. Right?
Yeah, no, we were just talking that joke about that, and somebody else had a shirt that said something weird like that. So it was like, it's totally, we like to talk about packet data being the glue to connect the other log information together, right? Kind of connect the dots game that we used to play as kids. So if network traffic and analyzing network traffic is so important, are there tools or techniques that you find most effective for really analyzing the packet data and during a threat hunting process?
Yeah. So I'm going to be clear for everybody out there. First off, there's a massive assumption. I'm assuming we've got listeners outside of the United States. There's a massive assumption that you can have access to it first, right? So that's kind of the first assumption that's there is you've got access to it, or you have the ability to collect it. Right. I've been in plenty of environments as an incident responder where it's like, can I go tap that little pipe over there where I think there's going to be some value? And it's like, absolutely no way, like sensitive data and stuff. So the first assumption is you've got it, right? That's technique one is, can I get it? Technique two then gets into the metadata side of things. I usually like to start from a threat hunting or a discussion or analysis perspective at the higher level metadata. Sometimes this can be really straightforward as what protocols are in use. And that might be one of the first techniques is I'm going to start to build and profile and understand the traffic in the organization. I might want to do that for certain hours. I might want to do it on a weekday versus a weekend. I might want to look for things, but I'm going to start to build a baseline of how I can understand and observe the traffic. And that's going to set me up to then start to look for anomalies. And I'm not couching this, Michael. It's like, oh yeah, just run these 2 scripts and then you're all done. Right. It can take a while to be like, it looks like most web traffic goes to HTTP. Most DNS requests are done doing this. Like that's all standard and straightforward. But what I'm looking for instead is I'm like, cool, let's push those out the way. 1% of all traffic is SMB. 1%, that's not that much. There's a hunt there, right? The company tells me or the organization tells me that RDP is not allowed. I see evidence of it. Like sometimes there's really easy opposites to what you expect versus to what you're seeing. Okay, great starting point. So I'm gonna start there. I'm gonna start there with hey, I want a baseline. I want to understand what's here. I want to have enough metadata that I can confidently say, yes, I see this versus that. The other thing I'll drop into, Michael, is protocol recognition is a
Okay.
huge benefit here because first off, adversaries will send stuff over non-standard ports just to mess with you. Number
Yep.
one. Number two is, and this might sound a little weird, but when I'm digging into network traffic, I don't want to have a conversation which is like, oh, I see a lot of stuff over 3389. I want to speak in business terms. I see RDP activity, right? I see
Mhm.
HTTP, I see FTP, I see SFTP, whatever it might be. I want to speak in those terms because
Right.
that's going to help me equalize with the rest of the organization that's there. Hey, I see RDP. We don't allow that. It's happening. Let's go further. Versus, and imagine this board update. You're in front of a C-suite. All right, we've got a gigabyte an hour going over port 80. 20 gigs going over 443. It's like that's not how we speak when we
Right.
represent things. So
Right.
I usually like to say, I want my tools to kind of meet me in the middle there. And as weird
Right.
as it may sound to some folks out there, you'd be surprised the number of times where it's like, here's all this metadata of network traffic. And
Right.
you have to go back and figure out and realize, wait a second, was this actually HTTP? Was it
Right.
actually this? Was it actually that? So high level metadata and kind of, you know, anything I could do to recognize and say, yeah, this is a particular protocol. This is a particular type of traffic. And then my last little tool technique is anything I can use to help automate that
Right.
on top of it is going to be huge. So if I can, bring together Python libraries that have the ability to automatically analyze and break down some of that traffic and understand it for me. If I'm looking at like data science applications where I'm able to say, all right, here's a massive chunk of network metadata, crush this down and help me find anomalies.
Right.
And now obviously we're at the AI stage as well, which is like, hey, help me understand and make more sense of what's here, what
Right.
fits and what doesn't fit. And then even buried within the what fits, is there anything that is even still slightly anomalous?
Right.
Because
Right.
remember too, Michael, like threat hunts don't always find adversaries. Sometimes they find out of policy. Sometimes they find shadow IT. Sometimes they find things that you're like, wait a second. That's why I talked about network being the least common denominator. I don't have host-based evidence for this thing, but I'm seeing something anomalous at the network level. I love this finding. So threat hunts can also lead to, wow, it wasn't an adversary, but we found 2 laptop computers plugged into a closet that we never knew about, and
Right.
a win is a win.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good one. I was talking to a partner not too long ago about that one.
Mm,
They were in particularly in tune with a lot of government networks, and the thing they were sharing with me is oftentimes in some government networks you'll find operational technology protocols, so
hmm
OT protocols running over just standard IT government networks, and they found
Yeah,
that unusual, right? And so
yeah.
I totally get what you're saying in that example. So
hmm
so taking that a step further, you kind of gave a few examples in your last answer there. What are some common challenges do threat hunters face when working with packet data? You said you start with the metadata. I
Yeah.
mean, we know from experience, full PCAP data can be very overwhelming to some people, right? So,
hmm
and it's often thought of as trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? You got literally gigabits of information, and you're trying to
hmm
find very specific interchanges and exchanges and handshakes and things like that. So, how can some of those challenges really be overcome and addressed to be as
hmm
efficient? And you mentioned SOAR, and I think that's probably one that I'm sure you'll expand on. But is there other things besides just SOAR in itself that in terms of overcoming some of the challenges of working with packet data?
Yeah. First is going to be, I think I mentioned this earlier, legalities.
Yeah.
First is going to be making sure you have access. That's going to be one
Right.
of the
Right.
biggest challenges because
Yeah.
it's really easy to listen to me be like, oh, you could just go run these things and you're good, right? But it's like, I don't have access to network data. So what do I do here? So first is legalities. Second, you're right, nail right on the head, the absolute volume of data. It's tough. It's hard to stomach for some folks because we are measuring it in the smallest quantity is, a 5 years worth of host-based logs and stuff. And it's a lot to take in. So metadata becomes important then. But I feel like folks who maybe have a solution in place that grabs full PCAP and then kind of doesn't really do anything with it, right? It takes care of that. Yes, we have full PCAP question. And what I found as a common challenge is, do you have network traffic? Yes, we have full PCAP. And it's like, okay, great. You have a granite wall. Like you have a mountain of granite. I need a countertop out of that, right? And if your team is not skilled in mining, carving, shaping, I don't know what goes into forming a countertop out of a stone wall. I'm just going to say, if my team isn't skilled in doing any of that,
Right.
what are we going to do with this mountain?
Yeah.
Right. What are we going to do with this mountain that's here? So the other one would be just like a skill set and like unfamiliarity. And because we're talking about a threat hunt or an incident response sense, that's a lot of times when you're pushing teams outside of the normal bend. So it might be like, hey, we have full PCAP because of compliance reasons. Cool. Have you ever tried to mine it? No one in my team knows how to do that. All right. Well, we just got pwned by a pretty big adversary. I'm going to need that PCAP data. And it's like, my team's never had to do this before. So I think another thing that I would like maybe add into like a best practice consideration would be is if you have access to it and it's something your team can handle, incorporate that into like your normal workflows, one. And then the other thing that you did mention too is like SOAR. It's automating as much of this as we can. Yeah. So if I have access to PCAP data and I have access to the metadata and a lot of that's being processed, offload that into an automation system. Right. Automated detections are a no-brainer, right? Should be there. Yep. HTTP traffic over port 443. Like that shouldn't be skating by NDRs or network detection systems.
Right.
Right. Number one. But then the other side of it is going to be also leaning on automations to help a team that might be overwhelmed or that might be too much in the weeds or might not have a strategy built around it. And you can simply say, well, I don't have a very network savvy team, so I'm going to invest in a tool set that helps my team become network savvy. It's funny. I had this discussion with a student I'm working with not 2 hours ago. We were talking about calendar apps, and I akin it very much to this as well. I do not have the skill set to manage my calendar from a booking perspective. Like someone wants to book a meeting with me, I'm like, I don't have the skill set to go check all these, provide time slots, everything like that. I'm going to lean on a tool that makes me seem like a calendar expert because that's what it's built to do, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to encourage the same thing from network traffic. I don't have anybody on my team who's network savvy. Cool. Invest in the toolkit that brings that level up for your team and helps them kind of, get that skill set while not needing to bring another FTE on board.
No, I loved your second comment there about you need to find a way to get a granite slab out of a mountain that you own. I mean, as you know, that's our whole approach of providing people packet data in the context of the indicators in their other tools, right? That we definitely set out to solve that problem because I completely agree with you that in itself, and I love that analogy, so I'm going to have to run with it just so you know from here on forward.
I like it. Take it. It's yours, sir. It's yours.
So I love it. So kind of taking that step further, cyber threats are constantly evolving, right? People are leveraging old stuff, reusing it, modifying it, making it new. How do you ensure your threat hunting and even your incident response processes and policies and workflows are remaining effective as some of these cyber threats can just continue to get more advanced?
Yeah. I love this question because there's two answers. The first is test. Red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, whatever you want. If you believe you've got, playbooks in place that should be effective, test them. There's free and open source testing capabilities out there, all the way to very bespoke, high expensive testing resources. Use them, make use of them, right? Actually read the results. Actually read and implement the results that are there, so that way you are maintaining some effectiveness. And let your team know and be very communicative about them. I'm very much of the idea and the belief that the red team exists to make the blue team better. The red team exists to make security controls better, and that's what they should be used for. So as weird as it sounds, I'll change the script a little bit here and say, hey, maybe I bring on some sort of offensive capability, or we do a purple teaming or something like that. Part of it is incident response, but the other part is threat hunting. Hey, red team, I want you to go 60% of the way and then leave the implant in place so I can see if my team can find it. Not detect on it, but hunt for it. So like stimulate a threat hunt, that's one way to go through it. So that's like bucket category one is test, test, validate, test, measure twice, cut once. The other high level category is threat intelligence, and it's just staying informed. as security personnel, we have to be up on the latest what's happening. Now, I'm not saying you need an entire threat intel team.
Right.
I'm not saying you need to go and hire a bunch of people, but I'm saying as security practitioners, it's worth it for us to keep up on what's present and what's happening. A lot of times you can get these updates from your vendors as well. You can be like, hey, do you guys have any sort of a threat update or a blog I can read or something? Create your own RSS feed, get into your own, follow a stream, whatever it is, set up your own elements of success. Now, I don't want every security analyst in the world to read every article back to back and become experts in every single piece of malware that's out there, but I am going to set minimums. And I'm going to say, if you're a security analyst at any tier and you don't understand why, VBA macros pose a risk and stuff like that, and to go a step further, right? Whether or not they've still been seen out in the wild, whether or not they've still been seen and are used these days, I don't need to know what group uses them. I don't need to know what country they have an affiliation with. But if you're a security analyst that's been in the field for months or a year plus, and you and I are chatting, and I'm like, yeah, dangerous macros, and you're like, what's that? And that kind of stuff, I'm going to say, you got some reading to do, right? No shame, but I'm going to say you got some reading to do up on, just stay informed. And then, Michael, I'm going to add a little bit of a responsibility token onto this too. If you're the one that's conducting or launching or running a threat hunt program or running a threat hunt for your organization, I'm assuming you're staying up to date on what's up and stuff. And again, you're not memorizing the MITRE attack matrix. You're not memorizing every threat group that's out there, but you've got a general idea of, I think I know how we might be able to be exploited or taken advantage of. Let's go hunt for evidence of that.
Right. No, that's a great point. Just staying current on stuff, because I hear a lot of these every day, and I heard a new one the other day that blew me away. It was actually a breach that happened in the job interview process. So that's one for, I'll tell you about that one another day. But it's incredible, some of the techniques and approaches. Some of the human phishing side of the equation too, right? That really changes things. So
yeah, absolutely.
Can you've got so much experience? Can you share some examples or a example of how packet data has really been instrumental for you in uncovering and or mitigating a cyber threat?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot in here. Yeah, so I've got quite a few that fall into this category from previous. I don't want to say previous line of work because still in cybersecurity, but back in the 2010s, which we're getting old on now. Like Michael, I'm starting to realize my age the more I tell these stories and whatnot. But there was I did a lot of kind of financially motivated threat actors and stuff. And don't worry, I'm going to bring it current. That extends into today and whatnot. Where I feel like we've shifted from let me steal and sell a thing that makes a lot of money to let me ransom your data and try to make a lot of money that way and whatnot. There's been a lot of times where I've worked with organizations to try and understand and profile, did data exfiltration actually happen?
Okay.
And this is one area where I'm going to argue and say, unless you have an exact command run by the adversary that proves, okay, they SCP'd this thing out, network traffic is going to be, network metadata, network representation is going to be the best way to answer. Did data leave the environment, right? So I'm taking legal side here, which is we need to answer that question. Did data leave? I'm not a fan of the we have no evidence of, because it just means we weren't collecting the thing at the time. And I'm not shaming. It's just, unfortunately, you're without it. But the number of cases that I've worked, or I should say there's been more cases that I've helped out where there has been some form of network metadata available. And it's like, guys, there's no question here. Like this individual was in your environment for 4 hours and there was a terabyte of data that left in the last 30 minutes. I mean, what do you think happened here? And I think the flip side of this, Michael, is usually when you read articles about breaches and intrusions, and they say things like, oh, the adversary walked off with 8 terabytes worth of personal client data that they're ransoming, blah, blah, and everything. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, how did 8 terabytes walk out the door with nobody noticing? The door, if you will, which I think just adds to the reason to have network detection capabilities in place. But the flip side of it is how much data is a normal data flow
Right.
for an organization, 8 terabytes might have just been like a blip in a day, you know?
Right.
So I tend to always rope back to, if I have network evidence to correlate with when I saw host-based stuff happening, I can answer questions like that with a lot more confidence.
No, that's a great example. And data exfiltration is the key, right? It's when you're losing stuff out the door. I mean, so that's a perfect example.
You
So
got to know, right? You got to know.
yeah, so Matt, what's one recommendation you have, or maybe you have more than one, for organizations really looking to improve in their use of network packet data in their threat detection and response processes, right? Because you and I've seen all sorts. Everybody from just got some basic firewalls to endpoint monitoring to people that full always on capture, right? So and
Yep.
there's everything in between. So what are some thoughts you have for people looking to up level?
Yeah. First is going to be assessing what you currently have in place.
Okay.
This is one that I wish organizations would do more often. You might be surprised at how much capability you already have in your environment, or how much overlap you've got
Right.
as well. So let's address that first. And remember, we're doing this with a focus on increasing better usage of packet data for hunting and response. So number one, look at what you have out there. When you recognize that there might be a gap somewhere from a visibility perspective, do you have the ability to solve it with what
Right.
you currently have in place? Okay. Now, again, we want to be able to hunt and detect through our network traffic. Do we have any sort of network detection in place? No. Guess what? We're not going to be successful in that hunt because we don't have it out there. So make sure that the tech stack you have in place aligns with your hunts, and then vice versa. Make sure that you're because one can also be the driver for the other. Now, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to say, I don't want you to weaken or neuter your threat hunts because you don't have the technology for it. I would rather use that as a catalyst to say, hey, we're really well covered in 60% of the environment, like almost doubly. But the other 40%, we barely have visibility into. Now we know where to focus and prioritize spend or renewals if we don't, right? That's number one. Two, when you have that technology in place, make sure your team is happy with it and they know how to use it.
Right.
Michael, I'm a huge advocate for this. Reach out to your vendors and say, this is not doing what we paid for, what we thought it would do. I'm not talking about misinterpretation, right? You told me this thing was a unicorn. It's a donkey with a hat on. Okay. Very different interpretation there. But hey, I was under the assumption that my team would be able to XYZ. We're having a really tough time doing that. This is one area that I find a lot of orgs would benefit from, is just reach out to your vendor and say, hey, I expected this. I'm seeing that. They might come back with training videos. They might come back with an opportunity for training. They might come back with, oh, you know what? My bad. Like, there's a new release that came out that fixes that issue. Like, you never know what's out there, but if you don't ask the question, then you'll definitely never know. So I'm always recommending folks be boisterous, be loud about what your tech stack is in place. And if it's not meeting what it is that your team needs, tell them, tell the vendors, hey, this isn't what I'm looking for. Fast forward to kind of step 3. We've decided that this vendor does not do what we want it to do. We're going to start to reassess.
Yeah.
Right. So in a way, this is improvement, but it's also a replacement of a tool and stuff like that. The pain points that your team had with the tool you've currently got in place is the first thing that the next tool needs to solve. Right. I won't name any names, but I will tell you right now, I've worked with some tool sets before where a PCAP search, and we're talking years ago, Michael, and it definitely wasn't Endace either. We're talking years ago. A full PCAP search through what I would assume to just be metadata would take hours upon hours. The entire team's gripes and complaints were, by the time I've done it, I'm outdated. I'm old. Right. Cool. Next tool I look at, guess what the first question out of my mouth is? How fast can my team operationalize your data?
Yeah.
Because if you're comparing me to vendor A and you're saying, oh, I'm better than vendor A, I'm going to say, well, vendor A, these are my pain points. Do you solve these pain points? Because if you do, we'll talk. And my last little point that I'll add in here about this, don't focus on the stuff that doesn't really matter. I'm not saying it's not important, but focus on the things that matter to your team.
Yeah.
You know, I had this really weird conversation with someone over Black Hat. Actually, they were so consumed with the data lake behind the tool that their team was using. They were like, oh, I don't like this cloud provider. I don't like that data lake. I don't want my data inside of there, blah, blah. And I'm like, your team loves the tool that you have in place. They love using it. They're raving about it, right? Oh, it's helped us. It's done this. It's offered this. It's offered that, and everything like that. Where the data lake is hosted isn't really a parameter that you can change, but your team's successful with it. So stop focusing on that other part, because what's going to happen? That executive is going to go sign another contract with a tool that doesn't work. They're going to append all those processes, and the team's going to be left without the same capabilities they had before. And all because, oh, I don't like the thing that I would never see. Right. And that's always one of those things where I'm like, if you can find a tool that has like their own cloud or something, it adds a little bit of reliability to it.
Right. No, that's some great points there. And I think, the other one I talk about when you talk about tools is just the interoperability, right? So many tools, look for tools that can interoperate with other tools and across your stack, right? Because I don't know any organization that has just one or two vendors, right? They've got a myriad of vendors, right? So you got to have your tools be able to interoperate with a lot of other tools. Otherwise, you're missing the boat. So Matt, 100%. First, I love it. The details you've shared have been incredible. One thing I always like to ask my guests as I kind of wrap up, put on your prognosticator hat for a second and look out 6 to 18 months, and that's an eternity in cybersecurity. But what's one thing you really would encourage our listeners to look out for, think about, right? Because you see it as kind of a big ticket item, either in cybersecurity and in threats, in threat hunting. What's something you think is something people should be paying attention to right now?
So a lot of answers to this question these days would be the adversaries using AI. I'm going to go the other route, and I'm going to say how are defenders utilizing AI going forward is what I would be looking out for. There's two sides to that coin. The first is, are they using it, willingly, but are they giving away too much information? Obviously, we want to be careful with that, right? Don't upload a network diagram to AI and say, help me optimize this, But the flip side of that might be, and I'll give a really easy example, okay? Let's keep it in the realm of network threat hunting and things like that. Hey, AI tool, LLM, whatever, right? Help me write a suricata signature. Help me write a network detection signature for this thing, okay? That's the starting point. And it's going to spit back out one that may or may not work. My team's not going to stop there. I'm going to say to my team, cool, there's an example. Treat it like an example. Break it down so you can understand more about how it works, And then I want you to add another port to it, right? I don't want my user to manually be like, okay, next line, end port, blah, 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 right? I want you to go back to your AI tool. Do me a favor, rewrite this rule, add in these other parameters. What does that look like? How does that change? One of the ways that detection engineering is going to change across any sort of telemetry is going to be how effectively analysts can lean on automated systems to help get them 80% of the way and then take the other 20%. I'm like, let's be clear. It's like years ago, it would have been, all right, well, let me go read the snort documentation and look at the examples and any directionality, blah, blah, blah. Like it's not that that's a bad process, and I still love the learning side of it. But these days, if it's like, hey, here's this threat, we need to implement a detection for this across our network data. Can someone get this thing in by this afternoon? The response is not, well, let me go brush up on my blog posts and see what's out there. Lean on your tools to help get you 80% of the way. Use the other 20% to build confidence.
No, that's a great suggestion. And I think, as a blue team expert yourself, defending, we got to be equally as creative, right? Leveraging the AI shift, shall we say. Matt, thank you for taking time. I know you've got a tremendously busy schedule, for sharing your insights and how to better secure networks. We'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our integrations with our Fusion technology partners, please go to endace.com. Matt, again, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Always love learning from you when I get a chat with you. So,
Michael, always great seeing you. Thanks for having me on.
All right.